interested with Bitcoin mainly through the Bitcoin meetups we're having in Osaka. And yeah, I started reading about the Bitcoin protocol. And I found that there is quite a few interesting things that like most people don't know. I want to start though with the basics, how Bitcoin works. Before I do that, who knows what Bitcoin is? Who has Bitcoin? Okay. Are you interested in knowing how the protocol, like how Bitcoin works, how transactions are done? Does that sound something like?
Yeah.
So I would make Bitcoin.
Okay, good. So Bitcoin was invented by some Satoshi Nakamoto, which is just a name on the internet. Nobody knows who he is. There is some theories about a guy in Kyoto, about somewhere else. Nobody really knows. The reason for that is also speculative. Bitcoin market is 1.1 billion at the moment. The electricity cost is $330,000 per day that the Bitcoin network uses for mining Bitcoin, which is required for keeping the network moving forward. And yeah, those are some questions I want to answer during the presentation. I want to start with how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin is a cryptographic currency. It's based on public key cryptography. So the idea that you have a public key and a private key, and you can do two things with that. You can either encrypt something and decrypt it with the other key, or you can sign something and everybody else can verify it. That's the basics of public key cryptography. For Bitcoin, the way it's used is that we have addresses, which are basically just public keys. And you have the private key that you keep yourself, and that allows you to do transactions from that address to a new address. As those addresses are just pairs of public and private keys, you can generate unlimited amounts basically in like no time. And the length of the bit, like the length of the key, makes it like unreasonable to try to hack that. It's easier to, by a factor of, I don't know, 30 digits, to mine Bitcoin, which is more valuable than trying to hack a Bitcoin address. Let me go further how a transaction works. When you want to do a transaction, you have an address where you have already Bitcoin in, and you sign the transaction by saying, okay, I want to transfer those Bitcoin to a new address, and you sign that and send that transaction into the network. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer protocol, which means your transaction will be just spread among the nodes. And the miners, which are the nodes in this peer-to-peer network, are then using their computers to first bundle up the transactions that they have and try to mine the next block for Bitcoin. What that means is they're trying to find a hash which has a certain property. It's to prove, like, I don't want to go into the detail of like how the algorithm for the work of proof works, but what it basically means is they're hashing over all the transactions that they have, and they're trying to find a certain hash. So they take the transactions plus a random number, and they're trying to find a hash value which has a lot of zeros in the beginning. As a hash function is basically randomly distributed, the only way to do that is like trying lots of different random values which are added to the transaction, which is, if you have like a random text or like a normal text and you hash it, you get like basically garbage, like a hash out. I think maybe a hash is people are familiar with hashes. If you add just one digit to that, you get a completely different hash. And what the miners are trying to do is they're trying to find a hash that has a lot of zeros. Now the number of zeros is the difficulty of the network, which gets adjusted every 1090 or 50 or something blocks. Goes down to about every 2 weeks. The network calculates how difficult it is with the goal of finding one block every 10 minutes. So the goal is to have an amount of Bitcoin coming at a regular rate by a bit, but the number of miners is flexible. So if you throw more power at it, you get faster your Bitcoins until the network recalculates how many zeros, how difficult it is to find a new hash. And what this hash in the end gives us, it basically proves that there was a lot of work being done to mine those coins, because it's random when you find that hash, so you have to do, let's say, 1 billion tries on average to find one block. Then every 1 billion tries, you will get a new block. Currently, you will get about 25, I think it's 25, is that true, Chris? Maybe, I think it's 25. This Bitcoin, which has a value of $2,500, which goes to the miner who finds that block. So every 10 minutes, $2,500 worth of Bitcoin are created out of, basically air. And the miner will get those and the fees which are in this block of transactions. So he has an incentive of adding up all the transactions into the block, because it will also make you money. So over 10 minutes, those are a few thousand to maybe 50,000 transactions with a cent. This will also make you money. Currently, the money he makes by mining is mostly though the reward he gets for finding the block. And why do we always do this whole hashing crap? Is we basically hash over also the old stuff. So the longer we do that, like every block has a hash of the previous one, which proves that the last one was already valid, basically. And our transaction over time will go further down and in our history. And if you would want to change, like let's say the transaction 5 blocks back, you would have to recalculate all the other blocks which come after that. And that makes it hard. Like if you want to do like an attack on Bitcoin, you basically need more CPU power than the network itself. Like basically you need to have 51% of the network. If you're coming from nothing, you basically have to double, like have the same amount of CPU power. I calculated that yesterday because I was interested. How much would that cost on Amazon? You would need about 1 million instances, which cost you $2, like of the higher CPU ones, cost you $2 an hour. But I don't think we'll even get 1 million instances at Amazon. I don't think they have that many. Before I go further, any questions on there's probably questions on how the protocol itself works, how it proves that transactions are unreversible. No?
I get that the transactions are unreversible. I follow the end part.
Okay.
But I don't get, and I know there's Bitcoin miners, like I read Wired, like I know about it in general, but I don't understand.
So okay, what's the reason for Bitcoin? You want a distributed currency which you can't attack. So you want something that you can't easily change the past. So nobody can come and like change something. That's the property you guarantee with like making transactions like over time more hard to forge. And the other thing is you have a peer-to-peer network underneath that whole thing. So the protocol is peer-to-peer based, so there's no single instance you can just nuke out and you're gonna kill the currency. Those are the properties you want with Bitcoin, and which are like the advantage you basically have. It has a few different, like also other things that make it different from another currency, which is debated if it's good or bad, which is that it's inherent deflational, because there is a maximum number of Bitcoins that will be mined. So currently the miners will get every 10 minutes 25 Bitcoins, and every, I think in 4 years or something.
How does that work? Why do they get 25 Bitcoins every hour? Like, how are they making Bitcoin?
Okay, basically the way, if you want to know the algorithm, it works that way. So you have 3 values for doing this hash function. You have all the transactions, and you hash over them, like in a certain order. And you have the hash of the previous block. So you have the previous block, you have your transactions, and you have a random number, and you hash over that whole thing. And you're trying to find a hash with like a lot of zeros in the beginning. And one thing that every time you create a block, one thing that happens, there will be a new address created, which then has those 25. And this value changes like based on the block number, I think. So after in the next few years, then it will halve again and again. So you will have a curve that flattens over time, and the last Bitcoin is supposed to be mined like in more than 100 years. At the current rate though, which is interesting, it will be faster, because we are growing exponentially basically with our CPU power on Bitcoin, And the adaptation algorithm, which is used, basically just uses the average, basically some kind of averaging. So we're always outpacing this averaging algorithm, which is trying to adapt. And the average block length was like 9 minutes or even slightly less. It's faster. But what's interesting about that is the total number of bitcoins which are mined will be only 21 million. I mean, it has an 8-digit, you can divide it up to 8 digits. So you will have 80 whatever tera or trillion, I don't know exactly. But you will have enough units, basic units to cover the financial system if you would want. So that's not a limitation. But the interesting part is if the inflation by itself is a problem, to use that currency in a normal economy. Do you have other questions? Or does that answer the question? Yeah.
How does Litecoin and other derivatives fit into the system here?
Just, sorry. I suggest that you go on with your presentation.
And then the questions later.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a general question. I will answer that later. So, okay, that's one question I wanted to say in terms of, in regards to the inflation-deflation question. Currently, the system rewards the miners, basically through inflation. What I mean is, there are 300,000 or 330,000 cost of electricity. Where does that money come from? That's a valid question. It's basically covered through those blocks, through those extra units of Bitcoin being created, which makes it basically inflation on the whole system. Later on, that amount of money has to be covered through transaction fees. Currently, that would be very expensive. It's like, if you divide the cost by the number of transactions being performed on the network, that's $8. And currently a transaction you can do on Bitcoin costs you literally nothing. Like, I don't know, I've done transactions sending them in without doing any fee and it will be accepted and will be transferred. But the incentive for the miners to work, obviously they have to make money on it, otherwise they won't do it. So I suspect over time there will be either a higher value of Bitcoin, which makes them more money through the Bitcoin they mine and also through the fees, or there will be less miners as the value, I guess, the value that they get from mining will decrease over time. I wanted actually to have this talk because I found out that the protocol itself is kind of like it is a protocol. It's not that hard-coded. It supports actually much more. So instead of only saying, okay, we can do transactions from one address to the next one, and that's irreversible, you can actually do much more. The normal client doesn't support most of that, but if you do like raw transactions by writing them your hand, you can do things that the network itself supports. Like, for example, you can have a lock time on a transaction. You can say that the next user who gets this kind of money will only be able to spend it after either a certain block number or a timestamp has reached in the network. One other thing that I found really interesting, you can do escrow. What that means in terms of cryptography on the protocol is you can transfer bitcoins to an address, which like usually you would need only one key to prove this is your address and you can transfer money out. What you can do though, you can create an address with like multiple keys. For example, 3 keys. You distribute those keys to different people. Let's say your friend and one judge who is judging the escrow, like with the safeguarding this transaction. Maybe he's not your friend, maybe he's the drug dealer and and the other guy is like checking that it's working. So you have 3 parties in that, 2 of who don't trust each other, but they both trust the third one. But they don't need to trust the third one completely. In a normal escrow, I would transfer my money. Let's say I use eBay escrow. I would transfer my money to a service that eBay provides, but nothing prevents eBay from running off with my money. It just happens to be that they don't do it usually. But you can do this kind of thing with Bitcoin without having to trust your third party. You can transfer it to an address where you need 2 out of 3 addresses to continue transferring the money, which then boils down to if your drug dealer is happy and you're happy, both agree to transfer the money, you don't need your third person. If you, however, don't agree, you both can convince your third person to transfer the money back to you. And that's implemented in the protocol, which I thought is pretty cool. Other things that you can do if you combine, for example, lock time with like a few more things, you can have a secure deposit for proving that you're a real person without ever handing handing over money, for example, website wants to prevent spam, and the easy way is like, give me some money, I'll give it back later. As long as I have it, I trust you're a real person. This makes it value to you to like not create thousands of accounts because it will be costly. But the other guy, like you sending the money over to the site is like also kind of sketchy because the site could run off. Now you can prove that you have money with Bitcoin by transferring to an address with a lock time that you don't get the money back until a certain amount. Basically, you're locking up money in a deposit on an account that the other party can't reach, but you can prove that you have the money, which you only have a limited amount of, and therefore you can like create thousands of millions of spam accounts. One thing that's also interesting, which made me think the guy that invented that actually thought about a lot about it, is like the addresses are hashes with checksums in them, which prevent you basically from doing typos. If the client, like the usual Bitcoin client, will check your address for validity, and it will prevent you from just having a typo in it. Now you could send a wrong transaction by doing it by hand into the network, which would be accepted and you would lose your money. But the usual client has a possibility of checking your address for validity, which is kind of cool. Other than that, what can you do with Bitcoin? Let's skip the first two. You can do cheap currency transfers, or at least that's the more liquid the markets get, the more interesting that one will be. Because currently, when you want to transfer money out of the country, you have to go to a bank. You have to you have 4,000 yen just for signing. I want to send that money over. It's a hassle. What you can do though, you can just exchange it to Bitcoin and then exchange from Bitcoin into another currency. I calculated the other day because I wanted to do it to a euro, and it ended up being about the same. And the reason is that the yen market is not very liquid at the moment. So you have like a spread of 5% on buying and selling Bitcoin via yen. Now, if you would do the same thing with dollar, you would make a profit, in terms of going to a bank. Because the normal exchanges have much cheaper transaction fees, being 0.6, 0.2, 0.5% on transactions, which will then add up to basically maybe 1% transaction fees in total. That's something interesting I want to try. Basically, the only time lag you have for doing this kind of thing is somebody transferring it out. So the exchanges sometimes take a bit of time to give you your money back, depending where you are. For the Mt. Gox one in Japan, it took 2 days. I also want to talk about wallets. One problem Bitcoin has, you basically have to keep your private key around. Otherwise, you can't do transactions. Now, if somebody steals your private key, he has access to the money, and it's basically his. You can just transfer it, it's gone. Transactions are irreversible, and your money is gone. One thing people don't know is that you don't have to register addresses on the network. You can create your address without ever being on the network, because you only have to prove that you have this address once you want to do a transaction. So you can create completely offline without ever touching an internet. You can create an address with your private key, maybe print it out, throw the computer away, and store the private key in your security box or something, and tell people to transfer money to that address. You you need that private key when you want to transfer money out, which makes it safe. That would be one way to keep your things safe. That's also the way most exchanges, what they call offline storage. So they have, let's say 90–95% of their Bitcoin money is not stored on a server where anybody can go in and take them out, but on paper, which somebody would have to verify by getting that paper and put it into a computer. Okay, then let's go to the questions. Before we finish, we're going to have a Bitcoin meetup in Kyoto next Friday, if you want to get involved. But let's go to the questions.
Yeah, that's right. What's the Litecoin plays into Bitcoin basically?
Sorry again?
The Litecoins.
Litecoin is basically a fork of Bitcoin. It has most things being the same as Bitcoin, but the algorithm. So one thing that Bitcoin has a property of its network, or basically miner, is that the algorithm they use for hashing is a SHA-256 algorithm, and that one can be optimized through hardware. Which means if you want to mine on Bitcoin, I would recommend buying customized hardware, which will be much faster than using your own computer, even if you do like GPU-based mining. And that means if you would use a computer for mining, your electricity cost would be higher than the money you would get back, because there is like this optimization potential by doing it in hardware. Litecoin, as I said, uses a different algorithm called script, which is basically a different hashing algorithm, and it cannot be optimized on hardware as easily. I think there is still a bit of potential, but it's much harder. I don't know the details of the script algorithm.
I've got a question about the escrow. You said that it sounded like one person creates the three keys that are.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to. Yeah, that wouldn't work because you would have to send them, right?
Right.
I'm not completely sure, but to make this work, you would have to be able to create them separately, right?
That's what I would imagine.
I'm not completely sure how the math works behind that.
About the currency exchange that you say, so for example, when you move from yen to euro, they go through Bitcoin, but they stay at Bitcoin for how long? You can do it.
If you do it in one exchange, you can do it in an instant, basically. If you want to transfer Bitcoin, the usual time to verify or like to approve that your transfer is correct is they use like 6 blocks, which means they wait 1 hour before they accept, which I think is overkill, because taking over the network for 10 minutes will already be hard, but yeah. So if you transfer Bitcoin into an exchange, they usually wait an hour before they let you use those Bitcoins, although it's like already there. If you work within one exchange, it doesn't really matter to them because they know you just bought it from some other guy on the exchange. You can buy him and sell him in like an instant, and then yeah, you wouldn't be affected by the currency fluctuation.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have quite an impact on the Bitcoin fluctuation, especially yeah.
Now for yen to euro, the problem is that there's like it's not enough money moving in and out through yen into Bitcoin, so the spread is really big. It's like today it was like 5%, so you have to pay 5% more for buying than you get for selling. If you compare it to the dollar exchange, that goes down to 0.5%, and then like it's much closer to the real value of Bitcoin, which is the average between those two values, and you get closer to the real exchange rates. And in the end, you will have only to pay the fees of the exchange.
I think the only risk is that if you hit maybe a spike between the two exchanges, that's what I was.
Then that is a possibility. Usually, for feedback for that, the Bitcoin value has been quite stable. It changes a few percent per day, but in a second. Okay.
How hard is it to set up an account with an exchange? Like how much verification is there?
I tried it only on Mt. Gox and only on the Japanese side.
Right.
You have to, basically there's like 2 laws. I think the follow one is the money laundering law, so they have to prove that you're a real person. What I had to do is just send a copy of my passport. They were happy with that. And I think, passport copy, and you have to have an address. You have to verify your address. And they usually do that by asking you for utility bills, or cell phone bills work as well. Anything that says, okay, this person lives at this address and it's kind of official.
You don't have to do that actually. For a certain amount of Bitcoin, you can register Mt. Gox without any ID at all.
Mt. Gox?
Yeah, I do that. I don't have any ID there.
Okay.
If you go above certain limits, yeah, they will ask you for your ID verification, but for a normal amount,
Do you know the amount?
I have 8 Bitcoins.
Okay. And the second thing you have to do is you have to register your bank account. To get money in more. Actually. And then you can transfer on the Japanese one is actually really good, like the conditions. I paid like 200, 300 yen, which is just an interbank transfer money that I have to pay. If it would be on the right bank, I don't know, then it would be free.
Yeah.
But other exchanges have like cash out for like, they charge 1% extra. Even like Mt. Gox to euro has like only wire transfers where they charge money on. But on the Japanese side, it's like basically free. Now you would be betting on that the the exchange itself is stable.
Yeah.
And Mongoose is the biggest one, so I'd say it won't go away, but there's always the thing of being hacked.
This happens every quarter.
But if you buy Bitcoin, you can transfer them out of the exchange like in seconds and nobody can touch it. Yeah.
Maybe if there are more questions, then you can ask Toby directly after. But,
We need to move on to the
yeah,
next
we have other-
presentation, sorry.
Okay, then thank you for listening.